All right, it looks like folks are in, so I will go ahead and get us started. Welcome everybody to the sixth session of the 5th annual Puget Sound Green Infrastructure Summit. I am incredibly excited that you're all tuning in and have been sticking with us throughout this transition version of the Green Infrastructure Summit. Today's session is going to focus on incentives for green infrastructure. We have a great slate of speakers that you'll be hearing from later, including myself, humble brag. And with that, I'm going to welcome us all with a traditional land acknowledgement. On behalf of Stewardship Partners and the Summit Host Committee, I would like to acknowledge that we are all on the traditional land of the first people of this region. Tacoma, where the summit was originally scheduled to be hosted, is the traditional land of the Puyallup tribe, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the Puyallup tribe, who have been faithful stewards of the land, water, and ancient history of life there since time immemorial. Many of us are attending this summit from other parts of the region. If you don't already know on whose traditional land you work and live, please find out. And take a moment to acknowledge with gratitude the land where you are and its first people. I'd like to take a moment and thank all of our amazing sponsors. Their incredibly generous support of this event through thick and thin has been quite a gift, and we're incredibly grateful to all of them, all of these organizations, companies, agencies that work for us every day. Also, a huge thanks to our Summit Host Committee, ECOS, MIG SVR, the Nature Conservancy of Washington, Pierce Conservation District, Puyallup Watershed, the Russell Family Foundation, and WSU Extension. And our advisory committee has been incredibly helpful, and our Summit Logistics team. Shout outs to Emma Vowles and Todd Albertson. Don't need to pluralize you, Todd, even though you do the work of more than one person. And at Cascadia Consulting, Lynn Knapp and Brent Edgar have been incredibly helpful making this a reality. So with that, this is a webinar, obviously, and you've probably been through a few, but just always good to remind folks that we're all figuring out these new technology platforms. Patience with technology and patience with the human realities of most of us working from home in one fashion or another, and the kids that may come through, or the pets or partners or whatever. It's all part of this reality. It's the fact that we can embrace that is one of the strengths of this community. So I also just like to throw out there the contest that I've been running throughout the summit, that whoever is seen juggling the most difficult homework webinar situation will win a incredibly valuable Stewardship Partners lapel pin. So the challenge has been thrown. And since most of you are probably familiar with Zoom, I won't go into detail about how to use it. But I will say that the way that we will the way we will operate this session is to use the Q&A function as the audience interaction pathway of choice. If you have a question for any of the presenters, use that Q&A button that's down at the bottom of your screen. Click on that and type in your question. The audience will not see that question until the panelists have seen it and just said either we will answer it live or one of us will type an answer. And once a question has been answered, everybody can see that answer. And then we'll also publish those along with the video recording of this webinar, which, just so everyone knows, this is also recorded. The chat function you can use as well. That would be a good way to raise any technical issues you may be having with your video feed or audio questions. And we will try to address those in real time as best as we can. At the end of the meeting, you can click the leave meeting, or if you have to leave early, that is the way to do it with that little red button down in the corner. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jessica Engel. I guess I should introduce myself as well. Aaron Clark from Stewardship Partners. I will be facilitating this session on incentives. I will also be a presenter later. And so I will have the honor of introducing each of these speakers. Jessica is a water quality planner for King County Stormwater Services section within the Department of Natural Resources and Parks. She works on a variety of stormwater management projects, climate preparedness and resiliency strategies, green stormwater infrastructure, incentive program development, as well as leads the county's 1 Million Trees initiative. Yeah, no big deal, just a couple of things. She works hard to find synergies among the plethora of county departments, regional agencies, and the amazing communities we serve as we all work towards common goals. The COVID pandemic has been one full of many stresses, but Jessica finds hope and excitement in the continued environmental work moving forward and seeing how our ecosystems are bouncing back with the lack of human interference. With that, Jessica.
Thank you, Aaron, and thanks everybody for tuning into this presentation. Quick shout out to Aaron and his team. I was really impressed that last year you didn't let a blizzard stop you from hosting the summit, and now you're not letting a global health pandemic stop you. So I feel really honored to be a part of this conference overall, and particularly this panel with Aaron on it. So thanks for tuning in. I always like to ground ourselves in the important work that we are doing here in the Puget Sound region. And let me see if my slide will advance here. Lynn, my slide is not advancing, sorry.
No problem. Let's try one more time. I'm going to give you control and then click on the screen twice and then move your slide forward. So.
Thank you. So I like to ground us in why this work is so important. I think all of us that are administrators of green infrastructure deal with the daily stresses, the hiccups, the barriers that can sometimes get us all frustrated. And we deal with a lot of members of the public who don't quite understand the importance of our work or may not even know what GSI is. And I think this image of our resident orca, Tahlequah, carrying her calf for 17 days is a reminder to me specifically that this work is very important. And I think it's a constant reminder of the dire situation of the health of the Puget Sound. But I think this story overall really allowed us to broaden the opportunity to engage with a larger audience on why water quality work is important and how every person has a role to play in the health of our salmon and orca populations. Oops. Because even in a place as environmentally conscious as, sorry. Okay, there we go. So even in a place as environmentally conscious as the Puget Sound region, we continuously see stresses on the last of our wild places. Our population continues to grow. We need to add more homes, more businesses, more commercial sites, and that's leaving us with more and more impervious surface that doesn't allow the rainwater to trickle into the ground. And I feel really lucky to work for an organization like King County that has been managing stormwater for many, many years, and in some regards before requirements forced us to do so. And we enforce regulations to manage stormwater on sites of new development. And we've been doing that traditionally with a lot of gray stormwater infrastructure to date, like the one that you see pictured here, an underground storage tank that allows us to utilize space above that tank and hold a large amount of rainwater. But much of the development in the unincorporated King County areas took place prior to the 1990s when stormwater controls were a requirement. Therefore, we're going back and retrofitting a lot of those properties so that we can handle the flow control and address the water quality concerns on those sites. Many of those sites are private property, residential and commercial, and so we are developing a program to incentivize those private property owners to add stormwater controls to their properties. And we're looking to do this utilizing green stormwater infrastructure techniques. Mainly because, I don't know about you, but as a government employee, asking somebody to raise their house and add an underground storage tank seems completely unreasonable, but also because green stormwater infrastructure allows us to add beautification to a neighborhood. There's a whole host of community co-benefits that go along with GSI. We are able to be more resilient in the face of climate change as we see our rainfall patterns changing. We can increase the size of a rain garden easier than an underground storage tank. So it sounds fairly straightforward. We give people money, we tell them add these GSI features to their site, and we start to make progress. But it's a lot more complex than that, as you can imagine. The unincorporated King County area is vast. We have a very diverse audience that we are trying to get to participate. And we also don't have a regulatory driver to do this work like a CSO reduction. So it's all voluntary. So how do we make a large, diverse audience be interested in this and develop a successful program? Well, a lot of people suggested that we looked at RainWise as a model or even expand upon RainWise in our unincorporated area. You're going to hear about RainWise after my talk, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar is very familiar with it. It's a highly successful program. For those that aren't familiar, it is a rebate program for certain property owners in certain basins in Seattle to add cisterns and rain gardens, using a qualified list of contractors, and if the work is completed effectively, the property owner receives a rebate check to cover a portion of the work. It's a great partnership between Seattle Public Utilities and King County's wastewater treatment division to reduce stormwater into our wastewater system so that we can reduce our combined sewer overflows in the city of Seattle. As I said, highly successful program. It's marketed really well. So no doubt it was looked at as a great template for our program or an opportunity to expand this program into the unincorporated area. But having worked in the unincorporated area, it gave me a lot of pause to launch into something that was already developed, because our unincorporated areas are very different than the city of Seattle. We have different demographics, socioeconomic considerations, political views, cultural considerations, and probably most importantly, opinions about the government and working with the government. And so instead of launching directly into utilizing an existing and very successful template, we decided to take a step back and actually go out and ask our audience. Again, sounds really straightforward. Ask the people who you want to sign up what they want done. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't start with audience research for a lot of our programs. We have time constraints, budget constraints. A lot of us operate under grant funded programs, and so grants don't always allow us the flexibility to start with this. We might not have the staff, we might not be comfortable doing community engagement in a meaningful way, so we don't know where to start. And all these are real barriers to doing this work, but barriers that I think we couldn't afford to use as an excuse to not do this work, so that we could really develop a program that is important to our audience and allows them to take part in this work and not create additional barriers. Because I had many questions. Do we want a rebate? Do we want a cost share program? How do we handle permitting? What do we do with contractors? How do we even address what GSI features people are interested in? How do we market this? What are the avenues that people out there in unincorporated King County utilize to access government programs? And do people even care about this stuff? And these were all questions I had that, sitting in an office in the city of Seattle, I'm just making assumptions about what people want. So it was really important for me to ask these questions so we knew how to develop this program. So I hired Terry Carell of Bridge Latino and Heidi Keller of Heidi Keller Consulting to conduct in-person both English and Spanish speaking workshops with residents of the unincorporated area. And we looked at 6 sub areas so that we could get an urban, suburban, and a rural perspective. And the results were really incredible. We heard things that were great ideas we had not even considered. And they were ways for us to make the program easier to launch, more cost effective. So first and foremost, we heard loud and clear, nobody was interested in a rebate style program, that having to front the money was a huge barrier to participation, and people would much rather see a cost share where we were very upfront about how much the county was going to cover and how much the property owner would cover. We also heard that people are very hesitant to have King County staff come on their property. They're afraid that we might see another code violation unrelated to our program that might get them into trouble, that they feel much more comfortable with a trusted nonprofit or King Conservation District being the liaison between ourselves and them. We also heard loud and clear that people really want to do this work themselves, particularly in our rural areas, which is not surprising, but really interesting to us, that they moved out there or they live out there because they really feel like they want to manage their land in a meaningful way. They feel like they're part of their watershed and they're larger contribution to the surrounding ecosystem, that they would want to learn how to do this themselves, get their hands dirty. And that was important because we hadn't considered this, and we're now looking at having that be a branch of our program. And that allows us to launch it a little easier, and it's a cost savings to us. But it also allows us to have people who are big stewards of our program. If they're the ones that want to do the work and get their hands dirty, they can keep that message going to other members of their community. We also heard that people did not want to be the specialist in the contracting, that they would want the county to handle all of the contracting. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's a time concern for many people, but also there's a language barrier consideration that not a lot of people are familiar with the contracting lingo. People don't understand how rain gardens or cisterns operate, and they were afraid that a contractor might try to get them to do more than they need to, or charge them more, or speak in a lingo that they quite don't understand. And so finally, we asked people their familiarity with other incentive programs, specifically RainWise. And it was a little shocking to me, but nobody from our workshops had ever heard of RainWise, which really shows us that we can be a little bit insulated in the city about what programs are really successful here. They don't always translate in our unincorporated communities. And people said that if it's a program that's really successful in the city of Seattle, they didn't want it replicated here. They wanted their own program that had their own flavor, that really represented what they felt was their concern and how they wanted to participate in an incentive program. And so that was really important information for us. So we had our information, we have our data points, we can no longer fear that we're making assumptions on how to build out this program. We had real information from our audience that we can justify why we're making every decision along the way to make this a successful program, which was really important for all of us. Because when we think about a new program, it's easy to get caught up in, we want it to be successful. We want to impress all the right people and get great PR and get these accolades for having a program that everybody loves. And it can be easy to take advantage of what is already out there that's successful. But at the end of the day, when we're talking to our audiences, we're really doing this for them. And it's not all about us getting recognition for a great program, but it's really about protecting this place, doing it in a way that's meaningful to our members of the public so that they can be engaged in a very meaningful way. Because if we're successful at this behavior change and we get these property owners on board, they are contributing a large part, they're contributing to the overall health of our salmon and orca species. So thank you for listening. I'm gonna look forward to the Q&A that you all have typed in, and I'm happy to share our final draft of our audience research. I think it offers a lot of insight into how we laid out the program, how we did our recruiting, and I've gotten a lot of great questions about how do I get started to do this, because it really changed the entire direction of our program and how we're launching it so far. So it's been a really eye-opening experience for me, and I hope that more people take the opportunity to step back and do some audience research. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. That's fantastic. So just so everyone knows, the Q&A questions, speakers will be able to respond in typed responses as other speakers are speaking, but we may save a few of those questions to be answered live at the end for Q&A. So that will come all at the end. Our next speakers are Nguyen and Grace Arsenault. Johnson is a water quality planner at King County Wastewater Treatment Division and works on the Combined Sewer Overflow CSO program. He first learned of green infrastructure while interning for the RainWise program and was immediately drawn to the way it leveraged natural processes to improve water quality. He has over 7 years of experience organizing in communities of color and immigrant and refugee communities, and hopes to promote the intersection between environmental health and equity in his work at King County. And Grace was a member of the RainWise program's outreach team for 2 years. She organized engagement opportunities and canvassed in Seattle neighborhoods in her time with the program. She also worked on projects to identify obstacles of installing green stormwater infrastructure among community members. Though she has transitioned away from RainWise, she remains passionate about green infrastructure and the pursuit of environmental justice in the Puget Sound. I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. So again, thanks for introducing us, Aaron. My name is Nguyen, and I'm a water quality planner at King County Wastewater Treatment Division. And I'm also a former intern with the RainWise program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Arsenault. I was a consultant with King County WTD working on the RainWise program outreach team, as was already stated. I did engagement in a lot of the basins of the RainWise program, which we'll be talking about later. And today we're going to be discussing the intersection of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's Social Vulnerability Index tool and GSI outreach, specifically through the lens of the RainWise program.
So the goals of our presentation were first really to share the basics of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's Social Vulnerability Index tool, share our process of studying the tool in the context of a GSI incentive program, and recommend a general framework and strategy that the entire region could use to use the tool and inform their own outreach. So what exactly prompted our research? In 2017, King County WTD began using the CDC's SVI tool to gather demographic data across the agency's service area. In addition to the operation and maintenance of its major wastewater treatment plants, WTD also builds large capital projects throughout the region. These capital projects on average take roughly 10 years to complete and include an intensive community engagement component that spans the life of the project. The SVI tool was brought in to supplement the community engagement efforts of WTD staff and to also identify opportunities where WTD could improve infrastructure and advance equity while delivering our projects. Like mentioned earlier, WTD currently operates a GSI incentive program called RainWise in partnership with SPU. The program offers rebates for homeowners in eligible geographic areas to install either a cistern, a rain garden, or a combination of both on their property. The program has been in operation for 10 years now and completed over 2,000 installations across Seattle. Though at a glance, the program seems to be highly successful. Over 90% of its participants have been affluent, highly educated, and/or white. So our team sought to understand how the SVI tool could be used to analyze the RainWise geographic area and promote equitable outreach and participation in GSI incentive programs. So let's start with the basics of the SVI tool. And what exactly is it? So it was originally created to help communities prepare for natural disasters. The tool integrates GIS and census data to measure the resiliency of a community's infrastructure. And the tool uses a combination of 15 social factors that can be grouped into 4 themes, which are further aggregated into one singular SVI score. Each of the factors, categories, and indices are scored numerically from 0 to 1, with a 0 meaning not very vulnerable at all, to 1 meaning extremely vulnerable to natural disasters. Here's a screenshot of a map that shows differing levels of vulnerability across the 4 themes. So we realized that the concept of the SVI is a little bit tricky to grasp with just a verbal explanation. And we found a graphic that was very helpful in understanding the way different components are integrated together. So on the very far right column are the 15 different social factors. The scores from those social factors are taken into account to define the scores of the 4 themes directly to the left of it or in that middle column. Finally, the scores from those 4 themes are utilized when giving an overall SVI or vulnerability index score. And that's the one that's all the way on our left.
So how did we begin to use this tool in the context of the RainWise program? When we started the project last September, we were extremely ambitious in our goals and just hoped to identify concrete outreach strategies by simply looking at the data that was presented to us. We spent quite a few weeks crunching numbers in different ways to see kind of what we could glean. What resulted were numerous discussions where we just talked in circles to make sense of the numbers, but realized that without the context, the SVI tool is just a lot of numbers. So in November, we decided to take a step back and redirect our focus a bit. Now we're using the SVI tool as sort of a jumping off point, a place to begin a conversation about vulnerability. First, we looked to develop a general framework for how we could utilize the SVI tool. This framework requires us to contextualize our analysis a bit by considering the key social factors that matter to us most as we're studying inequality and to the communities that we're trying to serve. From there, we could organize the data so that it guided us towards engagement strategies, but didn't necessarily define them for us. Through this process, we identified a lot of strengths of the tool as well as a few weaknesses. So first of all, the SVI tool provides a quantitative assessment of vulnerability, and it gives us the ability to capture multifaceted characteristics of a community into one numerical value. This then allows us to compare those different factors across communities that otherwise look very different. The factors also cover a broad range of community attributes. Rather than just relying on per capita income as an indicator of vulnerability, the SVI score allows us to incorporate more nuanced factors like language barrier, housing density, which also come into play when looking at vulnerability of a community. Last of all, this tool is widely accessible for outreach teams. So anyone looking to learn more about their communities that they serve can access this on the public forum. And it gave us instantaneous access to information about very deeply complex communities as well. And this tool is versatile and easy to use, but has some inherent flaws as well. First of all, the scores presented by the SVI tool are statistics and can't be solely relied on to tell the whole story of each community. The scores can't put a number on the relationships between neighbors or tell you about the benefits of having a multicultural community. And though we recognize those as strengths in our communities, this information is lost in this kind of quantitative analysis. Next, the RainWise program and the SVI tool have very different goals, which don't really align. The goals of the RainWise program is to address environmental problems that arose due to infrastructure failures that end up exacerbating pre-existing inequities, whereas the SVI tool's purpose is to assess inequalities in our social and physical infrastructure to better prepare for a natural disaster. With that said, there is definitely still value in studying the intersection of the two. And lastly, the data used in the SVI tool is from 2016. And with a city and region that's growing so rapidly, the accuracy of this information has decreased a lot over time. By identifying these weaknesses, we were able to remain conscious of our blind spots throughout our process.
So what is the best approach for utilizing the SVI tool? We first recommend using the tool to identify your relevant social factors. Our original goal was to identify all the opportunities where RainWise could become more equitable, especially in low-income communities and communities of color. And though the overall social vulnerability index score is very useful, it does not tell as specific or as transparent of a story as the individual social factors. When conducting our analysis, we analyzed both the aggregated social vulnerability index score as well as the disaggregated social factors. A few of the social factors we used when conducting some of our analyses included percentage of minority population in that census tract, percentage of population living with a disability, and per capita income. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but each of these factors touches on a different realm of equity and diversity, which we found to be very relevant to RainWise.
And then after identifying these relevant social factors, you need to find a strategy to organize and categorize the data. One method that we use to examine the outcomes of applying the SVI tool to the RainWise basins was to set a score threshold. Any score that surpasses the threshold in one or more categories, depending on what you're studying, will be flagged. This way, we can begin to understand which basins actually need the most focused energy. So in other research, we saw that 0.8 was a common threshold used for analyzing SVI data. So we applied that to our own study. So the South Park Basin is outlined in blue here. It was the highest scoring basin out of all 17 with an overall score of 0.97 out of 1. Is the first basin to be flagged using the threshold method. The Henderson Basin was the second highest score with 0.8 as an overall score. It was also flagged based on the 0.8 threshold. This threshold method suggests that these two basins require a closer look and potentially more intensive outreach. And though they didn't meet our threshold, there were 4 other basins who also scored very high in the overall SVI score. And we think that these basins shouldn't necessarily be left out of our conversation just because they didn't meet our threshold, but that maybe we need to introduce a new method of examining our data, like a tiered approach.
So the threshold approach was very helpful when you're trying to just flag different units to analyze. But if you're working with a larger data set, a tiered approach to analysis may be more helpful. So the tiered approach allows for more complexity and flexibility in how you approach your outreach. It would be amazing if every agency or every nonprofit here was well equipped enough to have a focus group in each neighborhood. But as we know, that's not really possible. So when using the tiered approach, you should take the following steps. First, with any sort of analysis, identify those relevant social factors or themes. Next, organize the units of analyses. Like for an example, in RainWise, we use CSO basins, and then organize them into common groups. And lastly, set corresponding engagement strategies for each of the respective groups. So this is an extremely simplified version of how this approach can be done. RainWise basins can be organized into tiers based on their scores for, in this example, the per capita income social factor. The corresponding outreach activities would be conducted based on those tiers. So if tier 1 basins represented the basins with the highest per capita income, those basins would receive the least intensive outreach, or maybe just different outreach, while the tier 4 basins with the lowest per capita income would receive the most intensive outreach. We can integrate additional social factors into the per capita income factor to add more complexity depending on the program's needs. As you can see, the SVI tool can help inform your message with some insight into the demographics of the community, but not necessarily dictate the messaging. There are numerous ways that you can use the SVI tool. It is very powerful, but has its drawbacks. If you're planning to use it, the first step, again, is to really identify where the program or project aligns with the interests of the SVIs. We kind of clearly reiterate that identification of those relevant social factors, and that should always be the first step. Next, you should have a clear understanding of what you want from the data. Having an outcome in mind allows you to conduct your analyses as effectively and efficiently as possible. And lastly, even with all those tips and tricks, the SVI is simply a tool. Nothing can substitute real on-the-ground outreach and engagement. And though this can mean different things for different communities, getting genuine engagement should always be your priority.
All right, I see, Aaron, we've hit our 12 minutes. Really quickly, we'd love to thank the GIS team for helping us applying this data, and also Dorothy Mulkern. She helped us immensely in the early phases of our project. If you'd like to check out the GIS tool yourself, there's a link down at the bottom. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, thank you guys so much. So I'm next up, and I've invited a special guest to introduce me. Step just a little bit closer, because it'd be weird if I introduced myself, I think. Go ahead.
Aaron Clark, my dad here, is an environmental scientist with experience conducting, communicating, and applying scientific research to the support of healthy, functioning ecosystems. In his role as Director of Strategic Partnerships, Aaron is driven by a belief in the positive impact that humans can and do have on the environment through restoration and stewardship.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Earl. My son, Earl. Just had to give him a little bit of screen time. All right. So I believe I can control the screen now. And as Earl said, I work for Stewardship Partners. You've seen me introduce these webinars. And what I'm going to talk about today is a specific project focused on equitable incentives for equitable access to green infrastructure benefits. Yes, I used the word equitable twice for redundancy because it needs it. So this work fits within the overall mission of Stewardship Partners to empower the caretakers of land and water and community. We do that as an organization through several different programs, including certifying farms under the Salmon Safe Eco Label, assisting with stewardship on agricultural lands in the Snoqualmie Valley through our Snoqualmie Stewardship Program, whether it's planting riparian buffers or restoring wetlands with volunteers. In our Adopt a Buffer program, we also have the 12,000 Rain Garden campaign, which hosts many parts of this summit, is part of the City Habitats campaign, and then our Sound Impacts tool. And all that stuff also fits under a general sort of value system of collaborative conservation. And that's who we are. I won't go into details, but there are a lot of different incentive programs around Puget Sound. You can find sort of a clearinghouse list of them and links to them on the 12,000raingardens.org website. They run the gamut, different rebate programs, cost share programs, grant programs, rate reductions, technical assistance, there's a loan program. And they also run the gamut in terms of how much money people are offered, anywhere from under $500 to well over $5,000 in a couple of programs that have no set limits. They really, it is a grand experiment that is ongoing in terms of what incentives will work where, as we've already heard a little bit about. But this talk is really focused on equity of resource distribution. If we're talking about incentives, we're talking about giving resources to people. And what's really important here is the fact that environmental harms have not been justly distributed over history nor currently. And if we're going to start distributing environmental benefits and environmental improvements, this is probably the most important point in time, inflection point, if you will, to transition to undoing that past injustice. So I oftentimes think about what happened in Seattle in the 80s with power lines. There is this sort of well-worn path of incentive programs. You want bang for your buck. There's this sort of mythical early adopter demographic that is typically white and well-to-do, especially with environmental programs. And what happened with the power lines was a model that was set up where the city would pay for a big portion of the cost of burying power lines. And it was a great idea to bury power lines, makes us more resilient in a lot of ways. But because not all the costs were covered, the folks who had money to spare were the whiter, wealthier neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods today have underground power lines while the rest of the city does not. And that outlay of resources went to the places that frankly needed it the least. So we ask a couple of questions. What are the financial barriers that we can address equitably and how? And what communication, outreach, and trust barriers can we address and how? And I will say that as an organization, Stewardship Partners has focused more on the financial barriers while working closely with more of our community-based organization partners like ECOS that'll be mentioned and discussed later on the communication, outreach, and community-based work. So I'm just randomly interspersing pretty pictures here because otherwise you're going to look at screens with words. Okay. So one of our first projects to address those financial barriers was to deal with the liquidity question. So this was working with the RainWise program. We wanted to figure out how can we make RainWise more accessible, both to lower income homeowners and community members, but also to smaller startup landscape firms that didn't have a lot of resources. So we got a bit of funding from the King Conservation District. We got some advice from the RainWise program, Natural Resource Defense Council, and we teamed up with Craft 3, a nonprofit lender, community development financial institution, who now operate and run this, this access loan. We called it the RainWise Pilot Access Loan, tried a few different names. none of them were any good, but that was what we ended up with. And now Crash 3 runs and operates this program. And basically what it is a low-cost loan to make homeowners that may not be able to put the money up front still just as able to participate in the program, because the contractor could take a loan against the rebate, and then the bank would actually be the one to get repaid by the rebate at the end. Contractor's not left holding the bag. It makes all kinds of homeowners a lot more attractive clients, and also makes it a lot easier for contractors. And I would say this program, by and large, has been moderately successful, and it's an entirely Crash 3 program at this point. Band-Aid, oh yes, more pretty pictures. I love the before and after rain garden pictures. They're always some of my favorites. The transformation, it's just so nice. All right, Band-Aid 2, also working with the RainWise program, and based off of a lot of community research that Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, ECOS, led, that we were a partner on back 7 years ago or so. But in addition to the rebate having a liquidity problem, a rebate model also oftentimes has a cost overrun problem. So with that problem, if you're going to get a $4,000 rebate for a rain garden you're going to put in your yard, but the thing is going to actually cost about $5,000 to build, or even $4,500. That extra $500 in cost is a much bigger barrier if you're income limited, if you don't have cash in the bank, than it is for others. And that's a great way to make sure that all of those resources go to people who don't need them. So instead, we decided, okay, let's give people who need it a little extra money. Let's let need drive this this incentive, and make lower income households eligible for even more money than other households. So again, these questions of who has the extra money, who can afford it, it is the affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods, and we sought to change that. So we got some funding from King County through the wastewater treatment division to provide these access grants that lay out an extra $1,000 or so over and above what the rebate does. And we created an income qualification process, or allowed nonprofit landowners also, such as churches and mosques and community centers, to apply for this extra mini grant or extra grant. And we relied on and brought in ECOS for that community engagement, to do the education, to do the outreach and the community engagement, to get and assist landowners in actually completing the application process itself. More before and after pictures, because this is the transformation we want to see. All right, so those are the Band-Aids, but what we really wanted to do was try and envision a new system, a way that incentives could be equitable from the ground up, from the beginning. And the way in which we did that was to build a green stormwater infrastructure mini grant program. I know you love the name. It's really just rolls off the tongue. Or GSI mini grants, if you like 3-letter acronyms, or TLAs, as I do. So the green stormwater infrastructure mini grants were really designed to expand incentive access outside of the RainWise basins. So the way that RainWise works, it's focused on combined sewer basins within the city of Seattle. So it's a real checkerboard of eligibility across the geography. People who learn about it, hear about it, and want to do it aren't eligible all the time, and there's no incentive for them. And so we wanted to fix that. And we also wanted to go a little bit beyond the city as well. So King County was a great funder to team up with on that, because the wastewater treatment division service area extends through a large swath of Western King County, and is covered by the Waterworks grant program that we were able to get funding from. Thank you. So the two tiers, again, using similar what we sort of building off of that Band-Aid model of the access grant, we just made it so that from the ground up, there are two tiers. The lower tier is for folks with resources. It's still a significant incentive, enough to tip the scales for those who can afford to do it, up to $1,500 for a green infrastructure project, but a much larger incentive for folks who are income qualified, or nonprofit landowners as well. That goes up to $4,500. We created as simplified of an application process as we could, and incentivize a wider range of GSI tools, partly because we're not just looking at volume control, which has to be the focus in combined sewer basins, but because we were talking about MS4s and other TLA, municipal stormwater sewers, where it's separated, the dealing with the stormwater in general, filtering it, cleaning it is great. So we added tools like deep paving, green roofs, as well as the typical rain gardens and bioswales. We also opened it up to a wider geography, as I mentioned, and we made payouts available for upfront material costs. Stewardship Partners, the nonprofit organization, administers the program and writes the checks, and ECOS does the community outreach, and we sort of split that budget roughly 50-50. And here's one of my favorite rain gardens, a Puget Sound shaped rain garden that doesn't look anything like this today, but was super fun to build. And I just want to share the results because I know I'm getting close to my time. But the question, are these Band-Aids and different systems working? And I have to say they are. In short, this map, don't worry about the details. You get a sense for where these incentives have been distributed. It is not concentrated in Ballard. It is not concentrated in Northeast Seattle, although there is distribution by and large. The mini grants, we've awarded 41 mini grants. We ran out of money late last year. We've been awarded more money and we'll be reopening the program soon, but I just have to say we've gotten so many folks on the wait list that we expect to give away almost all the money that we have been awarded in a very short period of time. So that's maybe for later conversation about how to get this even better funded. But with $75,000 awarded, that's not the total program budget, but the total amount of awards, 70% of those awards went to went to limited income and nonprofit applicants, and are managing roughly 1.5 million gallons of stormwater a year. And then for the RainWise access grants, every one of those, obviously, because there's an income requirement to participate in that, all of those went to income limited or nonprofit landowners, and allowed projects to move forward to manage over 1 million gallons of stormwater per year. So I'm going to stop there, take questions later at the end. And here's my contact information if you have any questions. We do hope to be relaunching those incentives, the access grants and mini grants, in the next month or so. We haven't set a hard date, but we're getting very close. But information on those programs can be found on 12,000raingardens.org, as well as all of the incentives. All right, I'm done. And next, I will introduce Genevieve Dial from the Department of Commerce, who's going to talk about building green cities. Genevieve is a senior planner for the Washington State Department of Commerce's Growth Management Services Unit. She provides technical assistance to jurisdictions on critical area protection and monitoring, Growth Management Act implementation, and long-range comprehensive planning. She was a program manager for the Building Green Cities project, which developed guidance for Puget Sound jurisdictions to incentivize low-impact development. Jen is passionate about environmental planning and fostering change to protect the natural world. Evening walks and a good NPR story while prepping dinner are her saving graces during the stay-at-home order. Thanks, Jen. Over to you.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Uh-oh. Oops.
I'm
Sorry,
muted.
Jen, I muted you briefly. My mistake. You can start over, sorry.
Okay. No worries. So like Erin said, I'm Genevieve Dial, Senior Planner with the Washington State Department of Commerce. And I recently was the program manager for a project we initiated called Building Green Cities. And I'm going to kind of go through the details of that today with you. This project was in partnership with many other agencies. We partnered closely with the Puget Sound Regional Council, and this project was funded through EPA's National Estuary Program, the Puget Sound Partnership, and the Washington State Department of Ecology. So the program was essentially started to provide guidance, which is what Commerce is known to do, to local jurisdictions on incentivizing LID that goes above and beyond stormwater permit requirements. So this here is a list of all of our advisory committee organizations. I just want to give a big shout out to all of the participants that made this project a reality. At Commerce, we didn't necessarily have the in-house expertise, so we developed this committee to lend their expertise on green infrastructure, Aaron included. Thank you so much. And this slide just depicts that the variety of the range of organizations that were involved in this process over the last 2 years. It was a long project, and we're excited to see it come to completion. So the goal of the project was to encourage developers in the Puget Sound region to go above and beyond the current stormwater requirements and install additional low-impact development solutions. What resulted from all of this 2 years' work was the guidebook that you see here. And it's really aimed at jurisdictions that are working with developers, but they have those tools and resources they need to encourage developers to go above and beyond stormwater requirements. And how we guided the whole process was looking at, I know it's kind of been a theme today in a lot of these presentations, audience research, going out and actually conducting a social marketing report, doing one-on-one interviews with developers. We worked with Cascadia Consulting to conduct those interviews and also interview local jurisdictions to find out what are the barriers to implementing LID on their sites. What are the motivators? What would inspire them to go above and beyond? And that was really the initial stage of this process and what informed a lot of the work that you will see in the guidebook. So again, that research included those interviews, but also an extensive lit review. We took all of that information and analyzed that and provided some data that really informed the products that you'll see in the guidebook. The guidebook has a complete summary of all of that audience research and background information for those of you who are interested. This slide here is a map of all of the jurisdictions that the developers we interviewed happened to work within. Again, this was a Puget Sound, focused project, but this gives you a sense of the depth and the breadth of the project. So what we found from interviewing these developers were some key likes and dislikes. These are really the factors that developers weigh when they're thinking about implementing LID. What holds them back, what motivates them. For the most part, it's probably pretty obvious. Obviously, if a project increases the value of the site, if it's, minimal disruption in installing it, how easy is it to complete? Is it expensive? How complex is it? Will there be ongoing costs post development? So those were the things we heard most commonly through the interview process. Essentially, what all of that came to was there's this sweet spot where the project is considered feasible, it's relatively affordable, and there's some guarantee that there will be a solid return on their investment. What we recommend in the guidebook is for jurisdictions to consider these needs when working with developers, and to really, if they want to promote LID, that these are the things they need to emphasize when talking to developers during those pre-construction meetings. Emphasizing the value of LID, explaining both the costs and the benefits of implementing LID solutions, providing opportunities for both innovation and public-private partnerships, hitting the talking points around reliability and durability. There was a lot of myths around just how durable and reliable LID implementation is. We also heard that a lot of developers rely on their engineers for information on LID. So there's a need for additional training and opportunities, resources, certifications, that type of thing around green infrastructure implementation. And then again, just additional resources that maybe can provide that additional training and education. So the guidebook itself, what's in it, what's included? Here's kind of the going over the introduction. We really wanted to address those myths that we heard in our interviews. The introduction of the guidebook really sets the stage for jurisdictions to understand how to use the guidebook as a tool for having those conversations with developers. The guidebook is broken into 4 sections. The introduction, which has a lot of that project background information, how to navigate it as a toolkit. The first section is really a series of fact sheets on overcoming those barriers. And they are standalone fact sheets that could be printed and handed out to developers, or could stand alone in a permit office at a local government permitting office. The second section is another series of fact sheets on the various incentive programs that we discovered through the jurisdictional interviews. And then the third section provides quite a few resources related to stormwater requirements, incentive programs, and training opportunities. I talked a lot about the introduction already, so I'll save time and kind of skip over that. But essentially, it just orients the municipal staff on how to use the guidebook and what's included. And it also addresses developers directly. If a jurisdiction wanted to give this guidebook to a developer as an educational informational tool, it works that way as well. So those fact sheets, this is a list of the 10 fact sheets in the guidebook. Each fact sheet covers the benefits, design tips, what's new in that particular installation methodology and technology, what's new in maintenance, and additional information and resources. And like I said, these fact sheets can really stand alone and be printed individually as a tool. The second section of the guidebook outlines guiding questions to help a jurisdiction develop an incentive program, or to take their current incentive program and kind of dial it up a notch. So we heard from a lot of jurisdictions that they'd like to be doing something, but they don't really know where to start. They don't really know what should be included. So this gets right at that issue and helps them develop their goal, come up with who their target audience is, and guides them through that whole process. It also includes a series of fact sheets on various incentive programs that many jurisdictions in the Puget Sound are already working on, has case studies of how they're successful and what to consider, goes over the benefits, who the intended audience would be for each incentive program type, kind of what some of the development implementation considerations should be, and also tips for success. And then that last section 3 has a series of additional resources, one of which is a pretty extensive Western Washington incentive matrix, which essentially goes over all of the incentive programs that we found in Western Washington, who's implementing them, what the program includes, a brief description, and a link to find more information. So if a jurisdiction is looking to model their program after someone else, this gives them a good starting point. There's also a stormwater requirements matrix in there that has all of the manuals, the stormwater requirement manuals that most jurisdictions are using, and a link to their code so you can find more information on what those requirements are. And it specifically highlights those jurisdictions that are using code requirements that go above and beyond ecology's typical stormwater recommendations. And then the last section is a whole list where developers and engineers can go and get additional training, certification, information, that type of thing. And that's pretty much it. The guidebook is just about final. It should be out by the end of this month on the Washington State Department of Commerce website. So I'll make sure Erin has that link and information when it's out, and everyone can have access to that if they're interested. You can also contact me and I can provide that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That's fantastic. And I think sets up very nicely our next presenter. Rose Jordan will be up next. And Rose leads marketing and business development at Greenprint Partners, which is a mission-driven green infrastructure developer with equitable, community-driven GSI projects across the US. Rose brings more than a decade of marketing and program management experience in consulting, public sector, nonprofit, and social enterprise settings. Rose earned a community-based urban planning BA from the University of Washington and her MBA from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management. This is her second week back from parental leave, so please forgive any dark circles under her eyes.
Not joking, Aaron. I think we need to get a Stewardship Partners lapel pin to Genevieve for the most beautiful slides. So if you can take care of that, Aaron, I would be very grateful.
Done.
We cut off the first few slides of my presentation, so I'm gonna verbalize them as best that I can. Who is Greenprint and why are we here speaking with you today? Well, we are a mission-driven green stormwater infrastructure developer. So if I were to fit ourselves into the landscape of the presentations that have been provided so far, we would be kind of like the contractor who's trying to participate in RainWise and get landowners to participate. So we're going to try to give you a flavor of what it looks like to build an incentive program that's going to attract and draw in mission-driven GSI developers to help amplify the success of the program and help get really high uptake in the kinds of projects you want to see. So that's who we are. We are a woman-owned B corporation as well. So when I talk about green infrastructure incentive programs, or GI2, if you want to use your three-word acronym like we love to, what am I really talking about here? We are talking about a program that is primarily serving large-scale commercial landowners. They don't necessarily have to be commercial. They might be a faith community, they might be a school, they might be a public housing authority, the kinds of properties that have large roof areas and large parking lots that make them a really great fit for GSI. So our job is to, working through programs across the entire country that offer these large scale incentives as part of their stormwater work, we help those groups participate. What's been really exciting is that we, as this national developer, we've seen these GI2 programs really hitting an inflection point. And you can see a few examples here on the screen with this table. Some of them have launched programs, some of them are considering launching, but this is showing how interest and resources have been aligning around this program model over the last few years. Okay, next, there we go. And here's a little bit of a deeper look at just a few of those. And this is by no means comprehensive, but you can get a flavor. What is the overall budget that cities are putting toward this program model? How does that break down on an annual budget level? And what are we really talking about when we're talking incentive levels per greened acre? And you'll see, you know, this is a different scale of program than RainWise. This is, you know, in San Francisco per greened acre, you could be spending almost $750,000 per greened acre. So we're talking about multi-million-dollar projects in many cases here. Okay, and one aspect of our work that we didn't necessarily anticipate is that because we're going into all these different markets across the country and helping deliver programs and getting customers to sign up, is that we're starting to be asked, okay, well, what's working or what's not working so well when people consider what kind of a program design they might want to build. So we've got this whole constellation. We do consulting calls with cities all the time just to talk through some of the insights. And we've got this whole constellation of decisions that have to be made when you're building out or fine-tuning a GI2 program. And I'm just going to focus on 4 of those for today to give some insight. And I'm happy if anybody wants to follow up and set up a phone call to talk about others, I'm always happy to do so. So let's dig into some of these insights. So first I want to talk about goal setting. And this can seem like a kind of a write-off part of putting together your program. Well, of course, we want to hit a certain number of greened acres or gallons managed. We want to reduce our stormwater runoff. And that's all critically important, of course, but we miss an opportunity when we have our top line goals stop with those fundamentals. We really, as a mission-driven developer who's focusing on creating high-impact projects that are rooted in the community and that are very equitably distributed, we want to see more cities putting in other kinds of goals into that top line goal. And that's, what do you want to achieve as a city through co-benefits with green infrastructure? What are the program uptake goals that you have? And you've heard a lot of the other speakers today addressing that beautifully. What does equity need to look like for this program to be considered a success? And how do you want to engage your ratepayers more powerfully? Of this type of program, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission was the first to really put co-benefits into their top line goals. And you see, when you look at their program materials, how that focus on co-benefits at the highest level trickles down into every aspect of the program and makes it much more likely that they're going to have staff alignment around achieving those goals, versus having a majority of the projects be very effective, but not very green gravel pits in industrial sites. Okay, next, let's turn our attention to incentives. What do we typically see with the programs that we're operating in with incentives? Well, usually cities are trying to offer a partial incentive, and you heard Aaron talk about that a little bit, that requires landowners to bring some level of capital to the project. We find that this tends to drive toward low-cost projects, which can be an excellent thing when you're limited on resources, but we also miss out on a lot of the more holistic projects that could cost a little bit more, but have so many more benefits that are going to flow to ratepayers and to the city in general. We also typically see that cities are looking to pay at the end of the project life cycle as a reimbursement, again, like many folks mentioned, which can dramatically preclude participation by low to moderate income communities. So what might it look like to create higher impact incentives? Well, number one, at this point in the game, for these types of programs, to get true uptake, you need to offer a full incentive, and you have to account for the cost of local construction prices, because those can vary dramatically. You saw in Philadelphia, where we work, the average incentive is probably about $180,000 per green acre, versus in San Francisco, where construction is extremely expensive, they're looking at $750,000 per green acre. We also need to look at covering developer soft costs, because as everybody knows who's tried to launch one of these programs, there's a lot of work that goes into cultivating interest and getting people through these projects, which oftentimes can last 18 months. There's a lot of customer engagement and handholding that happens in the sales process and in guiding through project management, and we have to account for that as well if we want a really successful outcome. And then we also want to think about, can we do a portfolio approach to approving projects where we can have some lower cost projects that balance out higher cost, higher impact projects, versus just having a standard threshold where we say anything that costs over this amount, we're not even going to look at it. And finally, we really encourage cities to think about paying milestone-based incentives throughout the project whenever possible, because that really allows it allows more broad participation, and it doesn't require getting quite so much financing, which of course comes with having to pay back interest. So at the end of the day, that ends up increasing the cost of the project. All right, let's turn now to targeting audiences, another theme of today. Typically, we're seeing one-size-fits-all programs. And when you look back at the results of programs that have been around for a number of years, most of the participants are really savvy commercial property owners who understand how to take advantage of a program like this. And we see very low participation in things like faith communities that are serving low to moderate income communities, which also consequently are often the ones who are at the lowest lying areas of cities that are the most vulnerable to flood damage and the kinds of things we can control with GSI. So how do we put a more equitable spin on this? Well, number one, when you're reviewing applications for people applying for incentives, work to weight those scoring criteria in ways that are going to prioritize the LMI communities. And number two, think about whether it really makes more sense to design a custom program that's going to serve the unique needs of that audience, which is going to, at the end of the day, be the absolute best way to get uptake. And I think you've heard that resoundingly from the other panelists today. Okay, and then finally, thinking about partnerships, and specifically here, how do you partner with developers like Greenprint or nonprofits who are helping to manage these programs? How can a city or utility think about how they should engage those potential partners? And we see the gamut across the country. So if you are a Philadelphia water department who has been doing this program model for the longest time, and they've got a staff of, I think, about 100 people internally, just working on stormwater, which is incredible, they may not need quite so much of the external help to run their programs. And then you look at the exact opposite of that. You have a program based in New York where they fully outsource the program, and it's set up like a public-private partnership where all of the risk is put onto that private partner. So how do you think about where a utility or a city should fall on that gamut? Well, it really depends. It depends on your internal staff capacity, your access to low-cost financing, and your appetite for risk. And if all of those things tend to be low capacity, low financing, low appetite for risk, you might want to consider working with a private partner who can help fill capacity gaps, provide financing, and then, of course, importantly, bring a real multi-market knowledge about what's been working across the country so that we can leapfrog other people's processes and launch more quickly. Okay, and I'm guessing I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to just blast through a quick case study. We've been so focused on the Puget Sound, of course, but I'm going to take everybody on a journey over to the Mississippi River to St. Louis, where their Metropolitan Sewer District has been running a GI2 program for a number of years, and I'm going to share a little bit about one of our projects there. They manage the Rainscaping Large-Scale Grants Program. They're looking to spend about $100 million on green infrastructure to reduce CSOs into the Mississippi River, and this GI2 program is an important part of that constellation of programs. So here's an example of the first portfolio of projects that Greenprint sourced and is managing soup to nuts on behalf of private landowners. All of these, I want to note, they meet environmental justice screening criteria. They're majority minority communities and they're low-income parts of the city of St. Louis. These are exactly the type of landowners who would never participate without a great deal of involvement, hand-holding, and customization, which is what we've been able to provide as a mission-driven developer. So I'm going to focus here on the one on the left, which is Central Baptist Church. It's a historic African-American church with 1,500 members that are very dedicated to social justice in their community. They have a project that's about 3 greened acres and it's going to manage 1.5 million gallons per year with a budget of about $750,000, which is fully paid for by St. Louis MSD. And we started this project the same way that we start every project, and that's through this lens of what we call benefits-driven design. Greenprint, through looking at research that's come out of a variety of universities, including right here, University of Washington, we've identified about 20 different co-benefits that are really meaningful at the community level. And we help guide the landowner and their stakeholders through the process of figuring out which co-benefits are most important to them. We don't even put a pen to paper on designing the green infrastructure until we figure out what are the most important co-benefits, so that then the landscape designers can design solutions that are going to maximize those for the community. And what does that do? That really creates buy-in. It increases the chance that this will be maintained as an asset, which we know is a huge challenge with incentive programs, is how do we maintain these? And it gets more public excitement and ratepayer engagement about these incentive programs. So in this case, after understanding what the most important co-benefits were, here's a snapshot of some of the actual SMPs or BMPs that were designed for their site. And then you can just get a little snapshot of how those co-benefits were achieved through those BMPs. I am happy to, again, provide one-on-one conversations and coaching with anybody who's thinking about launching a program and wants some insights into it, or just to talk. Here's all my contact information, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose. That was fantastic. It's really great to see such a wide gamut of scales that we've all been thinking about and thinking about on along very similar lines. We're going to switch to the all speaker view and open it up for questions and answers. Some great questions have come in over the Q&A. You'll see many of those as already answered. I was going to actually start it off with kind of a question for everybody. We heard a lot of discussion reference to community engagement as part of this. And we've also seen a lot of discussion about partnerships and collaboration, public-private partnerships, et cetera. In the experience that you have and just personal perspective, I'm curious, has anybody found particularly strong formulas for how, community engagement can be done right, and who from what sector, what type of organization, what type of entity really can engage in authentic engagement. And I'll just acknowledge that this is sort of a plant because Friday's session is going to be about community engagement. But I thought it would be a great way to start that conversation here. Anybody have thoughts on that?
I'll jump in really quick. It was nice to hear all the speakers touch on this to some degree, that it really does take resources and time. And I think when we talk about these projects, because I'm in pilot phase, so we're still looking to get pilot projects in the ground, that we're learning a lot about what we need to get rolling internally before we launch this as a larger project and open it up to a broad audience. So we're trying to take our time and really learning all of those hoops, but it's been pretty eye-opening to me just how much time and energy it takes to build relationships with the folks that want to do these pilot projects. And some of them take a really long time just to get the property owner comfortable with the relationship you build with them. And I think you need the acknowledgement that there's going to be a lot of costs associated with having one person or multiple people making those connections with that community member or with that property owner, and the resources that need to go into that, because it's going to take time, it's going to take the resources, and it really has to be genuine, that when people need you to come out to their site and talk them through their concerns, that you're listening, and then they see that reflected in how you move forward with the project. I know one great example is one of my pilots is a church, and seeing the church community be so hesitant to work with us, and now they've been going and taking their own field trips to learn more about stormwater, and they're hosting barbecues in their neighborhood to talk to people about stormwater management and how they want to be a green church. That took a long time, but to me, that has been so much more rewarding than thinking just solely about, as Rose said, the number of gallons of stormwater treated on that site, or how many acres we've converted into rain garden space instead of parking lot. Just seeing that people are excited and interested and they want to keep that growing within their communities is really special, but you really have to dedicate yourself to building those relationships.
Yeah, very true. Other thoughts or perspectives on that community engagement side of things?
Well, I'll just amplify something actually that Jessica said at the very beginning, I think, and it could have been Johnson as well, on the challenges of approaching communities directly as a government entity. We've definitely seen that as a developer who's trying to get as many projects in our pipeline every single day as we possibly can. We have to be somewhat careful about how these projects get sold. So don't think of that as a barrier as you're delivering these programs. Think about what are the partnerships that you can engage and leverage to get people excited and to build that trust. For us in particular, coming to folks as a B corporation or as a woman-owned business has been one of the ways that you start to chip away the armor of people not being sure that, you know, what are you trying to sell me? What's going on? And I'm sure being a nonprofit is another great way to be able to do that, is to build trust right away.
Yeah.
If I can add on to that, the RainWise program is partially, one of the members of the RainWise program is Sustainable Ballard, which is a community group that's been deeply entrenched in a lot of outreach projects in North Seattle, and I was a contractor for them. So using resources that are already there, like those deeply entrenched community groups, is a great way to get started.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And just to add to what everyone has already said, because all the answers are awesome, and I agree with all of them, is that you really need to be very explicit with the kind of engagement that you're doing with these communities, and just be extremely specific on whether, you know, you're only planning to engage to inform. If you're actually gonna garner feedback, how are you gonna integrate that feedback? Like, I think on the more, before working with RainWise, it was almost like very residential property by residential property, project by project. But I guess like working in more larger capital scale green infrastructure, there's very systematic ways that we evaluate different projects and how to move forward with them. And just being as explicit as possible and as genuine when you're engaging, to say, you know, hey, we're going to inform you. Our capacity is that we can't really integrate the feedback now, but potentially later we can integrate your feedback. And this is how we're going to use it to inform the choices we make on our projects.
Yeah, that's great. And it's already been said, but just to echo it in anecdotal form as well, when we first started trying to do RainWise access grants and GSI mini grants, our first thought was, it was basically Jessica's first or second slide. We're going to give money away. How easy could that be, right? It's going to be the easiest thing in the world. And we did not budget for community engagement or outreach at all. And we gave away this many dollars in that first 6 months. And when we realized that, oh, right, this is an engagement process. We need communities to own this work. And, it was something that we already knew from work we'd been doing for decades, or for over a decade with farmers in particular. But you show up and you listen and you build that trust. But for green infrastructure in the urban environment, our organization isn't representative of the communities that we were seeking to serve. And so, sure, we're a non-governmental organization. We do not have the "we're from the government, we're here to help" problem. But we walk into South Park, and most of our experiences in the Snoqualmie Valley, it doesn't translate readily. And partnering with another nonprofit organization, ECOS, in the case of the work in South Park, where staff speak all the languages represented within the community and are part of all of those communities. That community-based partner is a really important distinction as well, even within the .org sector. And that's been a huge lesson learned. So listen. I heard that, collaborate across sectors. It's what we call connecting the dots here in the city habitats world. Those things are definitely key, but it's also pretty clear that there is no single answer, no cookie cutter for community engagement. It's definitely going to look different everywhere it is. Looking at, let's see, other open questions. One other thing, I heard it, Rose, you touched on this a little bit, but maintenance. Maintenance is something that comes up over and over again with green infrastructure and all these conversations. It's this kind of messy problem, but it's also one of those opportunities where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So has anyone seen or started to experiment or play with how to incentivize maintenance, how to make maintenance something that we're paying for properly, that we're valuing the service of maintaining these green infrastructure solutions?
Well, I can tell you the Cadillac version that we'd love to see across the whole country really quickly to anchor us in the promised land. And that is cities like Milwaukee, who are doing these projects on private land, but they're bundling them into a big public-private partnership. And they're including maintenance as a part of that contract. So in that case, you are buying a certain amount of green infrastructure that it's going to be deployed through individual incentives to landowners, like we're seeing in each of these programs we're talking about today, but it's being bundled in a way that accounts for maintenance, it pays for it, and you don't, as a city, you don't pay your partner unless things are being properly maintained. So you're paying for performance. That is the Cadillac. We're not there yet in most cases, but we're hopefully getting closer.
Yeah, one thing that we're looking at for our incentive program, like I said, we haven't rolled it out fully. We're still pilot phase, but maintenance is always the top concern for every property owner that we talk to. And we're actually looking at our pilots to do 1 full year of maintenance once the project is constructed, so that while we're doing that maintenance, we're actually teaching the property owner how to maintain it properly so that they feel comfortable taking that over. And we're actually exploring on our other pilot site, which is on Vashon-Morey Island. It's a grocery store. We're looking at actually getting some of the community groups who are really excited about the project involved in part of the maintenance. So there's a lot of school groups that want to use this as a learning classroom. And we're trying to get them on board to actually teach them how to maintain it so that we can have some volunteer groups be part of that maintenance process as well. And it's a big ask and it's a lot of budget, but we just continuously hear about so many incentive programs failing to address maintenance, or we see these projects go into disarray because the property owner just can't maintain it, or there's just not the resources, or they don't know how to. And we really see this as an investment of public dollar in a facility that's going to be long lasting. And so covering the cost of that maintenance. As you know, we see a year, it can be seen as a long-term cost, but that's pretty short in the duration of the entirety of these projects that we hope that they last for a really long time.
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead, Grace.
Okay, I can talk on the RainWise maintenance program. They started up, I believe, last year, and me and another intern would go out to people's homes and say, hey, you know, we'd love to check out your cistern that you installed 7 years ago in some of the basins that are now closed, like over in Ballard. And people were generally very excited to have us come out. Our signups were completely full within the first week. They were excited to have someone come out because they were a little trepidatious about actually getting into a cistern and cleaning it out. So when we provided that opportunity for someone to just say, hey, we'll do it for you and we'll show you what we're doing, and then you can repeat those steps, they were very open to it, but there's definitely apprehension. Additionally, we had an event called Cistern Fest where we invited a bunch of people to Finney Lutheran Church, which has a very large, a few very large cisterns. And we had someone go around and teach community how you could clean out a cistern, and it was very well attended and inspired a lot of people to get RainWise and start their own installation at home. So I think building that community support and encouraging people to think of it as more of a holistic process, not just the installation, but actually the long-term maintenance and how that can be fun for the whole family, for example, was how we kind of started to tackle that maintenance issue.
That's great.
Peering into the future a little bit too, you know, we're seeing more and more cities adopt stormwater fees. I know that's dangerous to talk about. It can be a very unpopular idea, but it can be a very important idea as well. And as that becomes more common, dedicating a certain part of the rebate that a landowner would receive on their monthly stormwater fee and having that automatically put toward maintenance is another way to think about scaling it up to a broader solution that can impact a lot of projects.
Yeah, I do wonder, because rate reduction incentives are something that we didn't talk about a lot today, but it's something that does come up and seems like it's naturally tied to ongoing performance. It kind of gets to that pay for performance aspect. I know that Seattle Public Utilities does offer a rate reduction that you can marry up with RainWise. You can get RainWise to pay for the project and then get a rate reduction for that project in year 2 in perpetuity, I believe. But it's for bigger sites. But that's definitely something that seems worth exploring. Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you very much. I don't think we have further questions, and we're close to our wrapping time. But Jessica, Johnson, Grace, Rose, and Jen, you provided a lot of great information today, and appreciate you putting time with this and rolling with the punches as we rescheduled from you know, the modern COVID era of doing things this way. So thank you all very much. I will just give a couple of plugs for upcoming sessions. So this Friday, we have the authentic engagement session, community-led and institution-led perspectives. That one will be at noon. We've scheduled it for an hour and 15 minutes. We'll try and stick to that. Next Wednesday, so there's no session next Monday, but next Wednesday on the 20th, we have from noon to 1:30, RainWise and equity in GSI. That's a dialogue that will definitely build a lot on what you've heard here today. It'll dive in a little deeper into the RainWise program and how they're working to re-envision it through a race and social justice equity lens. And that will be led by our friends on the host committee from ECOS, and speaker from Seattle Public Utilities as well. Vicki Raya will join. And then our final closing keynote session is going to take us back down to Tacoma, Puyallup, Pierce County, and focus on a lot more of the leadership and innovation coming out of that part of the region. So we're going to be really excited for that closing one on May 22nd. That's from 11 until noon. It's just an hour. And that will be the last of the Green Infrastructure Summit webinar sessions. We will provide everybody updates on what we're going to do to get everybody together in person in a real way and share food and break bread and drink wine maybe. But that we'll have to wait for public health to tell us when that's safe to do. But until then, I really love getting to be together with all of you this way. And hopefully you'll see you again on Friday. With that, take care, be well, build green infrastructure.